Okay, it's here.
Sí, Sebastián.
It's here. I think we're on time. Can start now.
Yes, we can start.
Comenzamos. Vale. I think everyone is mute. Good morning, everybody in Chile. Good afternoon here in Europe, especially in Portugal. Welcome to our fourth session of this European Market Entry Series. As you know, we have been conducting on a weekly basis an encounter with different ecosystems throughout Europe. We started on November the 5th with Barcelona, Spain. Then we continued with UK, not only London, but regional as well. And then last week, we had the opportunity to exchange some ideas and views with the ecosystem of Munich in Germany. And this is the time for Portugal. And now we have a great panel of 3 members of this ecosystem from Lisbon and Portugal in general. I'm going to give a brief introduction of the speakers. We're going to have a panel with presentation, and at the end, we're going to have some time for Q&A session. So you're more than welcome to leave your questions through the chat box, and then we can take them from there. We're aiming at 1 hour session so that we can keep everybody according to schedule. And just as a reminder, the 5th and the 6th sessions are coming next week with Sweden, and the week after with France. As a trade promotion bureau, we are also very much involved in the detection of opportunities for our startups, for our ecosystem, not only seed and early stage, but also scale-ups mainly. And we've been doing a lot of different efforts from soft landing programs in some markets to participations in trade exhibitions and fairs, congresses. And we're trying mainly to create these networking opportunities with partners, local partners, to look for the long term. We're doing these sessions from the conviction that scaling globally is the only way forward to our ecosystem and for our startups and scale-ups. Probably our speakers in the panel today, probably you know very well the story of Startup Chile program that has been created from the Chilean government 10 years ago. More than 2,000 startups has gone through the program. It's been quite successful, but it comes a time when they need to scale up globally, and ProChile is a natural partner together with Corfo and some other institutions in Chile. So this is the aim, the main aim of this session is to get to know better each ecosystem, to have a view so you can highlight the main attributes and differentiation factors for your specific ecosystem. Before I give the floor to João, I would like to thank also all the support and collaboration from the Chilean embassy in Portugal. So Jimena, Angelica, and of course, Mr. Ambassador, they've been really supportive. Not only with this specific session, but in the time, throughout the years, we've been participating in Web Summit as one of the key events in the country. So we count with their support, and we appreciate it. And of course, there are some elements of the Portuguese ecosystem that are perhaps not so well known in Chile. I think it's fair to say it's probably one of the youngest ecosystems in Europe. But it's a very vibrant one, and it's gotten a lot of attraction in the last years. So we're going to receive and welcome João, Pedro, Ribeiro, and Pedro Henriques. They're going to give us a presentation, each from their perspective. We're going to have the view of a more institutional partner, public-private entity. Then we're going to have the look of a soft landing, a specific view of the soft landing and tools there are in Portugal to establish businesses in Portugal. And finally, with the view from the investors throughout the experience, how it's been developing and their main mindset, so we can learn and take some tips, hopefully looking for new opportunities in the future. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to João Borga is Executive Director of Startup Portugal, very passionate about innovation, technology, and of course supporting the whole ecosystem, not only in Portugal going out, but also receiving And we know you're quite busy with next week Web Summit edition. So thank you again for your time. And thank you all guys for joining us. So the floor is all yours, João. Thank you.
João, you are on mute.
No, I'm not anymore, I think. Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's a pleasure to be here. So I will try to do the impossible, which is go through 24 slides in about 10 minutes, which I think it will be insane. Let me see if I can share my screen. And now I'm no longer seeing the call. Okay.
Yeah, we can see you now. We can see your presentation.
Okay.
And João, it's all right if you need 15 minutes. It's quite okay. Don't worry.
Okay. Muchas gracias por esto. Yo lo voy a hacer en inglés porque todo el mundo está hablar inglés, pero por aquí muchos de nosotros también hablan castellano, español. Pero venga. So Portugal, as a general country, it's an open economy. It's a welcoming economy. It's a country where everybody once in their life either has lived abroad or has someone in the family who lives abroad. I think that's part of our DNA, and that's part of what you're going to see. And a lot of what's happening in Portugal, it has to do more with how people are and what's in the culture of the country than a major effort that we're all doing in public institutions and everything. The only difference is that now we started to marketeer that way of being and that way of living. So, a guide to Portugal, very quickly, and going through it in a fast manner. So, what the hell? Why Portugal? What's happening over here? What is the importance? So there's very different reasons why Portugal has become a young ecosystem, a vibrant young ecosystem. Some of the things that we really do well, it's HR, it's the skills, the technical skills of our generation, of the youngest generation. We have the most qualified generation. We have a lot of infrastructure, and that was one of the reasons we had problem in the past, but now we're taking profit out of it. So we have good roads, good connection, good fiber optic systems. It covers almost all of the country. On the contrary to other countries, we invest heavily on that. And as a country, as a culture, we are welcoming to everybody. So, and we, in the last, I would say, decade, we have produced and punch above our weight. We have produced several unicorns, not as Startup Portugal, but the ecosystem, the entrepreneurs. There's one that is missing over here, which just came out of in the last few days, which is Fecha. I think the last round of funding makes them a unicorn. For you to have kind of a perception of this is for 10 million inhabitants. It's more than Italy or Spain have in terms of unicorns. And I think that's relevant to see how we can support entrepreneurs to make their companies global and scalable. And I think that's something that Chile also has, which is it's a small country with 10 million inhabitants that when it starts to produce a startup has to think globally. And this is part of our DNA. It's part of the way startups get started in Portugal. So some numbers, I can say a lot of things about how Portugal is good and how it's doing, but the international benchmark, how people evaluate us and what they say about us, it's really important. And I would highlight the second number. It's the third safest country in the world. And the countries above us are countries like Iceland and other places which are really cold and really wary to live and to build your startup. So for those who intend to build a startup and to have good offices in Europe, this is a good place to be. There's also a number which is not here, but it's also important, which is the welcoming factor. We were considered, I think 2 years ago, to be the most welcoming country for expats. And if you want to open a branch of your company or open operations in Europe, you should do it in a place where they welcome you and not in a place where you will feel as a foreigner. So it is a big ecosystem, not as big as some other countries. For us, it's quite an honor to be represented in a GDP. So having 1% of the product of young startups already showing up on the GDP graphics, it's something that's relevant to us. 1% of a country like ours means that they're growing fast and they're growing big. And so But all these numbers do not take the experience, do not explain the experience. And the experience is about people, the food, and the weather. And Chile is also a sunny country. So imagine yourselves building this in Sweden. And I know Sweden is a really cool country to be in with a lot of design. But if you have lived over there, like I've lived in the northern countries, you will feel the grayness of everyday work and everyday weather. And having the sun setting at 3 o'clock, it will make a difference for everyone. So what is Startup Portugal? We are a public-private think tank. We started in 2016, and we were supported at the time by a secretary of himself, an ex-entrepreneur. And he realized that there was the need to have a body that could translate the language from entrepreneurs to government and the language from government to entrepreneurs. So we sit over here more or less in the middle and try to act as a translator, as a promoter for the ecosystem. I think very similar to what Startup Chile has done for many years now with a lot of success. So some of the things that we actually do and they take a lot of our time. And our initiatives. So some of our key, I won't go through over the 40 different initiatives that we have launched in the last 4 years. But some of them, the most iconic, I would say, it's Startup Voucher, for instance, which is a grant that is given to entrepreneurs to develop their technology and their startups throughout a year. And that supports 2 entrepreneurs per project. Pitch Voucher, where we teach entrepreneurs how to pitch their startups. The Road to Web Summit, which is a very mini accelerator program compacted into 2 days, where we help startups preparing themselves for international events, in this case, particularly to the Web Summit, and they learn how to deal with media and how to pitch and how to deal with investors and many other things. And then we do missions abroad, taking startups outside. We help startups with the co-investment fund of the 200M, which is an investment fund that helps whoever raises money from international partners to co-invest to get 50% more out of support from the state. We help startups who decide to come to Portugal with Startup Portugal, and we have helped design and implement and promote programs like Startup Visa, which is self-explanatory, Tech Visa, which helps attract better skilled HR to Portugal, and the one-stop shop, an e-residency. I would highlight maybe e-residency, which is a program that we're going to launch that gives a digital residency to those who don't live in Portugal but want to work with the Portuguese state structure and bureaucracy, let's say it like this. Use some tools to achieve this. One of the tools that you can also use is Startup Hub. Startup Hub allows you to identify the startups that are working in Portugal and the VCs and different incubators and accelerators. It's a good tool for people that come from outside to map potential partners in the country. So if you want to work and make a partnership with someone to have a softer landing in Portugal, it might be a tool that interests you, or maybe see who's the competition and what's the level of the competition in terms of new technology and startups in Portugal. We have a network of incubators and accelerators. If you decide effectively to actually to open an office, this should be a good way to select a place to open your office, to see the conditions and who's the highest skilled mentors and accelerators who are focused in your sector. And we have developed different things like webinars to support people throughout the pandemic, sharing the knowledge of other startups, how things are going, how they're developing, and what's the story behind them. Also related to COVID, how to use these times to pivot or to develop further skills or to improve your startup. And we made this with a partnership with other partners like Portugal Ventures, Digitaliza Já, which is an initiative with a lot of different startups and corporates in the ecosystem to help companies, SME companies, to digitalize the digital transformation part of their business, or Tech for COVID, which is an open community that has developed a lot of solutions for the national health system with open source and a non-profit approach to implementing technology and help us go through these difficult times that we're living. So what we actually aim over here is to help our startups, but also help international startups in how to use in the best way our country, how to use the different tools, the different opportunities, and make from Portugal the best trampoline that you can have to go Europe or to go global. And this is Startup Portugal in 7, 6, 5, 4, 10 minutes. Thank you very much, Sebastian, and everybody. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. You are right in time. Quite a talent there. Appreciate your insight and also quite good pictures and images. I think you mentioned a few very interesting items. Perhaps we can go through later in the Q&A maybe. But you mentioned culture. You mentioned, of course, weather. But there is a lot more than that, of course. I think it's really important to highlight the public-private collaboration. That it's very evident because there's not only private institutions, you also have a lot of tools and incentives and R&D, tax incentives, and there's much more than just one element. There's not only one Web Summit event, not only one Startup Portugal, but there's a lot of collaboration going across, as you mentioned, a small country, very similar to Chile in GDP. Perhaps we have about double the population, but it's very similar in terms of the economy and the way you have been generating new startups and scaling globally. So I think there is a lot more to see there. I hope we'll get some questions for you at the end. But thank you very much, João, again, for joining us. I would like to introduce now Pedro Henriques. He's CEO of Bridge In. This is, if you can correct me, of course, Pedro, if I make some omissions, but it's mainly a soft landing program, or at least a company with the look to solve all your needs when you're thinking about expanding your business to Portugal. Why we thought it was very important to have not only institutions, but also programs such as this specific is just to highlight and give an example. We know the type of scale up and startups coming from Chile to different markets. They have different motivation, different problematics, and they need to tackle them with different tools. So we will probably see mostly at least 3 main events when companies are trying to sell their solutions or service export from Chile directly on a normally B2B basis. The second one will be through joint ventures, finding a reseller or a distribution model with some local partner. But definitely there is a growing amount of companies that choose to go to the market, establish a team, establish a company, whether it is for operational issues, for tax issues, or for whichever reason they prefer to do so. We have to be able to confront each problem with different tools and needs. So I think for us it's a very interesting way in which to get grasp and more details about the process in Portugal. So thank you very much, Pedro, for joining us, and the floor is all yours.
Absolutely, and thanks so much, Sebastian, for the nice intro. Hopefully you can see my screen already. It should be a landscape of Portugal rooftops.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah,
no
okay, cool,
with the
brilliant.
Great bridge, yes.
Yes, a red steel bridge, a little bit smaller than the one in San Francisco, the famous Golden Gate, but still some similarities, interesting enough. Hello everyone, thanks so much for attending, a pleasure to be here. I'm Pedro Henriques, as Sebastian said, CEO at Bridge In. I did put a couple of slides here together, and the focus is on how we assist, and but also tell a little bit the story about other companies that have expanded to Portugal. Obviously, some of the challenges, everything that João said is very true. But obviously that's the core premise where we start, right? Then the second thing is how we laid out a plan and how we can actually expand into a country. From my own experience working in global companies, what I can tell everyone on this call is that indeed Portugal, especially for anyone that is not in the European continent, does position itself as a very good entryway into European country. That is true for companies in America, South America, Asia, but also, well, because of Brexit, also maybe the UK. We do see a lot of traction of UK companies that want to keep a presence in mainland Europe. So obviously, the topic for our talk here, expanding your business to Portugal. And what I like to start always by saying is that we do need to, well, embrace differences, right? Having a good plan, a sustainable plan, a successful plan to get into a different country is to plan for the goods and what are potentially the bads. Now, I think João used all the internet memes in his presentation. So I was kind of stuck to just use this one from, well, one of the latest games, I believe, between our great two nations. Unfortunately, it got to the final. We didn't. But hey, we are still friends, right? But what I like to say as well is really any company, any looking for, in this case, transatlantic expansion, right? We need to appreciate the differences, obviously the similarities as well. And it's funny, Sebastian, that you did talk a little bit briefly just about this, right? So I was looking up, just a refresher, and indeed, a little bit double the population, Chile comparing to Portugal, a pretty similar GDP per capita, but, well, way bigger as a country, right? Almost, well, over 8 times probably the size of the country. What is also interesting when we look at this, and one of the things we talk a lot from whoever is not on the region, is to considering, okay, I need to have a base in Europe, and that presents an opportunity, obviously, a challenge as well. We are comparing a lot of times which country in Europe you should choose. And when I was looking at the GDP per capita, I was actually very positively surprised. It's actually pretty, I would say, pretty similar, right? And it's actually similar. A lot of the key data points from Chile are, I believe, way similar to Portugal than other countries in Europe, namely in Eastern Europe. With that said, always one of the things, and João also mentioned that briefly, is the language skills. I think last time we were indeed on the 12th position, but the last ranking from EF Technologies, we are in number 7. So that has improved. Well, I don't know if everyone improved their English, but indeed it is one of the countries in Europe that is easier to speak in English, which opens also a lot of doors to well, expand to other locations. But not only that, also Spanish. Indeed, Spanish is right here, right? So I'm a very bad example. I'm not super savvy regarding speaking foreign languages, I guess, other than Portuguese and English maybe. But indeed, you do see a lot of that language skills, and that's yet another advantage comparing, for instance, with other countries in South Europe, like Spain and Italy. So I think that's yet another great advantage. Another thing here, before getting into more kind of the practicalities about soft landing and what you should consider and how you can do it, is the differences in culture. We tell a lot about this. Just the other week, we were doing a similar event with some folks in Brazil, and well, we do share the exact same language as Brazil, right? But what that sometimes causes is that the difference in culture is not appreciated enough, right? So we see a lot of Brazilian owners, executives coming to Portugal, not eventually doing a lot of the preparation work they need to do, and spending 6 months, 1 year to really get some traction and start to get deals or really do the development or adapting to the local culture. So, and that's exactly the type of pain point that we exist to, well, solve. This also came after talking, obviously, before we even started, we did talk with a lot of founders that moved to our country. A big boost was indeed for the Portugal being recognized as a hub was Web Summit that will happen next week. And so with that, we had a lot of executives choosing Portugal. And when asked what was the good and what was the bad, the good always boils down to people are good, very good skills, very good language skills, very good technical skills, very good work ethic, also very important. where it kind of, well, obviously food and weather and all of that we already know all. Where we sometimes struggle, and there's no point sugarcoating, bureaucracy. I would say Europe as a whole, especially if you come from more liberal democracies, sometimes can feel a little bit too overburdened with bureaucracy, which is just something that we need to do in the end, right? We just need to navigate through it and try to do it with the less amount of mistakes and the less amount of time spent. So, and that's really what we at Regine aim for. So indeed, we can help companies soft landing and getting into Portugal. We have been working with companies in two different ways, and obviously this is a very particular year, 2020. So it didn't change the long-term vision, but it did change the more short-term tactics in the way that companies need to be helped with. So we have here on the left what is our, I would say, classic offering, which is professional soft landing. So there's a lot of obviously good private and public agencies like Startup Portugal that do an amazing job promoting Portugal, obviously like this missions, being part of these events. But where we want to add is to actually do the day-to-day work, right? Work with all you guys, founders, work with startup executives, senior management to accomplish what is needed. And on the left side here, soft landing, I like to position this as your interim country manager, right? So help you set it up, everything that you need, both from an incorporation, legal entity, all of that, but also have a go-to-market strategy. Know exactly how you should operate, where could be your key competitive advantages, where could be your main risks. So it is to have someone boots on the ground to do a lot of this heavy lifting for you. You don't need to come, adapt, understand the small differences in culture and all of that. We are here to do that. Our goal is always to give you the tools and the capacity to then, with all this information, be way more focused and way more successful and efficient landing into the country. Just to recap, obviously this does include going through incorporation, finding lawyers, accountants, opening bank accounts, having those local fiscal numbers, but also other, I would say sometimes less mentioned things like, okay, if you want to employ someone, what are the typical salaries? How do you find insurance brokers and all of that? Which then kind of pulls me to the right bit of this slide here, which is, especially with the pandemic and a lot of travel restrictions, unfortunately, people could not travel. And people still want to expand, but it was just not practical or even possible to travel. So one of the things we started to get later this year, quite a bit of a request is, okay, I want to have a team in Portugal, but I can't actually go there and incorporate and sign all the legal paperwork. So we started to offer a little bit of a different order, which is, okay, we can help you build the team, do all the employment, take care of all the payments to tax, social security, benefits, and so everything and so on that you do need to have a team up and running and working, and do business development, be doing, I don't know, maybe customer success, technical development, really whatever may be, is to have that ability to have someone. Now, when we also look at businesses that want to become global, I personally feel, and this comes from my own experience working in multiple companies across the world, is that it is indeed quite important that you do plan to have a regional presence that enables you to, number one, support your customers and do business development as well, obviously, from a regional perspective. We do have a little bit of a time zone difference. It's not too much, actually, but it is also important to have someone sometimes that is local, that, for instance, if something comes up in the morning, you can be there. So all in all, a lot of these companies growing, they need to have presence in regional. We do believe Portugal is a great region for you to land your first presence in Europe. And well, there's two different ways here that you could do this. Either you go from scratch in creating the legal entity, do everything that you need, or you focus on building the capacity and the team first. And then with time, when you get to a decent size, you then take care of the incorporation. What does this need? And this is sometimes, if you never did an expansion and never open a company elsewhere, sometimes we do tend, and as I guess a lot of the founders are, they are very positive, right? They always see the glass half full. The challenge with that is that we sometimes don't appreciate everything that is needed, all the boxes that need to be crossed, so that we have an operating system that meets all the legal requirements. So I won't go into too much detail, but it is a platform that goes all the way from recruitment to real estate brokers, co-working, social security, translation, PR, accountants, and so on and so forth. Moving on here, just kind of a laundry list of everything that you actually should be doing when launching into a country. Obviously, the legal incorporation, but if you are building a team, you need to go through all the recruitment, all the onboarding. You might or might not want to actually have a physical space. You do need the physical address though, but maybe the office is the thing of the past. Everyone will be living out of their home office as I am right now, or a co-working spot or something like that. Anyway, that's not just it. It's also vendor negotiation, finding the best insurance broker, finding the law firms. Also, another thing that is quite important that João also mentioned a little bit, there are grants, there are incentives from the government that you should plan, and if applicable, you should apply to, obviously. So these are just some examples, obviously, of the deliveries. I can keep moving forward. So just on the last bit here, I'll just mention a little bit of how you can actually have your team in Portugal. There are obviously a lot of options. The first one goes hand in hand with you incorporate, you find people, you hire them directly, right? And that's a typical way companies, expand. On the bottom here, you have all the other way that we do see a lot of increase with this remote work, which is, you just use freelancers or outsourcers or contractors. I do think that that's eventually not the best solution. It really depends how you see your human resources to be human capital rather than resources. If people are very important for you, I believe that you should have a plan that you have more engagement and more control, and that you attract the best people out there. So that kind of pushes to direct employment. Now, it is true that because of everything we also said, sometimes you might not be able to do that quickly. So what we offer here is a compromise with this employer of record solution, where you don't actually need to incorporate them first. There is some I guess, controlled way and less risky way, at least in terms of process and effort, to ramp up a team. Follow that with the actual creation of the subsidiary or branch. And so this is also how it works really quickly. Obviously, we can help with recruitment if you want. It's not even our key focus, but obviously we have boots on the ground, we have partners on the ground. You would select everyone from the team. Everything from the operational standpoint would be managed by you. The employment and every legal need would be us. And quite important, you can onboard them at any time. That's the end goal. It's your team in Portugal making your company grow. And lastly, I think I already kind of laid this out a bit, but yeah, so in phase one, the stepped approach to launching to another country is you build your team, you will be developing business, you will be starting selling, you will start supporting your customers, whatever may be the case. We can help making that adoption curve a little bit easier, but then the end goal should be on a phase two to actually incorporate your subsidiary and internalize this team to be your human capital, your people. And that's pretty much what I had regarding soft landing. I have really quick data here. I think João already mentioned a few, so I'll be quickly through this. Obviously, have a presence in another country, mitigate geopolitical risks. We see a lot of trade wars, a lot of tension in the last few years. So that's yet another thing why I believe you should embrace a more global organization. Also mentioned, Portugal is a very secure, third safest country in the world, very safe and strong democracy. It is, I feel like, a strategic location, not only with South America. Unfortunately, this was TAP Air direct flights before COVID, obviously. Unfortunately, we did not have the direct one to Chile. Hopefully in the future, who knows? But it is still quite an interesting connection between Europe, North, South America, and Africa. high quality of living, also mentioned here, the sun, the food. Indeed, for an expat insider source, they say that Portugal has the highest quality of life in the world. That's quite important. When you are moving to another country, either you, one of your executives, you don't want to put them in a country where it is too cold or unsafe, just because it might actually be cheaper, the cost of life there. But you need to enjoy where you are or where you are sending your people. Skilled workforce, fifth country in the world that spends more in education. You actually also spend a lot. I saw that metric. Chile also spends a lot of money in education per capita, which is great. I think that's exactly probably also a sign why you are having such success with startups and all of that. And lastly, let me end here. Welcome to Portugal. I hope you do make the jump and you are very successful. We do embrace different companies and people, and I think you'll love it. I'll just leave here. My name is Pedro at bridgin.pt. If you want to get in touch, feel free to.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Pedro. It was
Pleasure.
very clear, very formative as well about the process and the different options you can consider when looking at Portugal as your base destination to embrace the European market. I love your picture about Vidal and Ronaldo. I think that's obviously a connecting point always between Chile and Portugal, will always be that way. So I appreciate your presentation. I have a few questions. I will save them for the last bit. So I will now quickly introduce the other Pedro in the panel, Pedro Ribeiro Santos. I will introduce you and give you the floor, Pedro, immediately. Pedro is partner in Armilar Venture Partners. So we'll have now the view from the investor's perspective. Pedro has been related with innovation, technology, and corporate and startup for over 12 years in IT management consulting with companies such as Accenture, Boston Consulting Group, and many others. So Pedro, thank you very much for joining us. Very interested in hearing about Armilar. I've seen the trajectory. You have more than 20 years as a venture partner with a large portfolio under management with 6 funds. You will tell us all about it. But you're broad. You're not only European focused. So we understand you're doing a lot of scouting internationally. Very interested in hearing about how it goes, how you see the process, and of course, congratulations for the 18 exits and 3 IPO. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Sebastian, and hello everyone. Very great pleasure to be here. So yeah, I'll just very briefly just give you a few words about Armilar, just so you know that who you're hearing this from. And then I only have 5 slides, I promise. So in essence, yeah, like Sebastian has already told you, we've been around for quite a bit. This is actually our 20th anniversary. We're a fully independent venture capital funds manager. Right now investing out of our fund number 5. So we have a total of about 260 million euros invested and under management. We're fairly generalists, being a local VC in Portugal. But we do have a strong preference around deep technology, so companies that have proprietary technology, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that in an upcoming slide. And as Sebastian has already introduced, yeah, we've been international from day one. I mean, as you can imagine, 20 years ago, there weren't too many investment opportunities in tech in Europe in general, and Portugal in particular. So very early on, we started investing internationally, and very importantly in the US quite early on, which was pretty instrumental for us to learn about venture capital and create a little bit of network, which till this day still serves some of our portfolio companies well. And of course, we invest a lot in Portugal and in Europe as well. We've been always multi-stage, but always within the early stage sort of arena. So from, depending on the fund, from pre-seed to Series A, on some occasions even up to Series B. And our track record is, above more than 60 investments made, number of exits. We've had the privilege to be involved with some of the more successful success stories here in Portugal. So we were, for example, an early stage investor in OutSystems, which was the first Portuguese homegrown unicorn, a very successful company, and others. So just so you know who you're hearing this from, I won't spend another minute on Armilar. I will go into what brings us here today. And by now it's fairly evident for everyone that Portugal has conquered its space as an important entrepreneurial hub in Europe. So here on the right-hand side, you see the results from the EU Startup Monitor in 2018, where they put Lisbon in 5th place after London, Berlin, Paris, Copenhagen. This is pretty impressive from what it was just a few years ago, 10, 12 years ago. So it's a fairly recent phenomenon, but it's also not an overnight success, right? So you see, on the left-hand side, people started writing about it from 2013 to 2014. And we ourselves as Armilar, having had the privilege of being here for so long, also had the privilege to witness everything that happened and the whole transformation that happened. And that happened more or less around after the last financial crisis, 2008 and 2009. And we've always had, and this has been said before by previous presenters, and continue to have very strong technical talents, very good engineering and science schools. But up until that point, 2009, the entrepreneurial spirit was really not there. Of course, there are always exceptions, but in general, it was not there. And people would, come out of universities and look for jobs for life, the utility at a bank, sometimes in consultancy. When I graduated, I had never heard of the word entrepreneurship, to be honest. And then all of a sudden, with the crisis, the jobs for life were just not there anymore. So there was that angle of need that led lots of people to consider entrepreneurship as a viable career. And that sort of coincided with a perfect storm of lots of incentives from the state being made available at that time to support entrepreneurs and to support investors. A lot of information being made available of what it means to create a startup, to fund a startup. Universities becoming aware of the needs to incorporate entrepreneurship curricula into their courses. So all of a sudden, there was this huge wave of very young people, very young, talented people setting up the business for the first time, launching their startups. Of course, that's created a large wave of a hype, which has now evolved into the stage of maturity that it has reached today. What does it actually mean that we claim to be an important entrepreneurial hub? So let's also look at the numbers, and some of the things here obviously are also connect well with everything that's been presenting. So this is our own analysis, what we've gone and done. Of course, we need to keep in mind that Portugal is a small country. That's already been said too, by any measure. So what we've done here is put it in comparison in relationship to GDP on the left-hand side and to the local domestic investment capacity over the last 10 years using data from unicorns. And I realize it's an imperfect measure, but it's one where data is available, so it's a bit of a proxy to measure this. And I should caveat that on the right-hand side, we've excluded from the charts Romania, which is a complete outlier of zero investment capacity and one huge success case, which is UiPath. But outside of that, only carve out here, the general message here, of course, is that Portugal really ranks pretty well in these measures. We even compare with what would be normally referenced as much more mature ecosystems throughout Europe. Now, what is maybe not apparent from these charts is the quality of the underlying companies here, in the sense that none of the successful Portuguese startups, and even all the other ones that are not as successful, were created based on trying to serve a local market. Because there's no such thing as a local market. Portugal is not a market. It's at best a pilot. It's a good pilot for that matter, but it's not a market. So all the companies that are created here are, in general, created always with a global ambition of internationalizing very, very quickly, becoming a global company. And for that, and also based on the sort of talent that we find here, in general, the companies are created with something that is distinguishable, that is defensible, that enables them to scale and to internationalize and maybe globalize which typically revolves around technology. So very often what you find in the success cases that we already mentioned a few of them, were companies that have a technology that is their own, is proprietary, that has lots of years of R&D behind them, that is very defensible, and therefore enables them and defends them in their path to globalization. Whereas, in many other European countries, where the markets are large enough, you very often find very successful businesses that are based on serving the local market first, and then maybe expand. And if you go next door to Spain, for a long time, the two unicorns in Spain, and there were only two, it was Glovo and Cabify. Nothing wrong with these businesses. I wish we had been investors in them, brilliant businesses. But essentially, they are replicas of other businesses with similar technologies created elsewhere. So, of course, they're naturally, by design, by definition, almost limited in their capacity to become global. Of course, if they come to a new market before any of their competitors is there, they have a chance of establishing a position, and they have done so with success. But it's a different set of companies, and just a different set of talent that is required to create those companies. So very, very strong technical talent, very, very often companies created based on proprietary, differentiating, disruptive technology, which is not always the case in other geographies. And that is also coupled with another important thing, which is this. So this is software engineer salaries, just as a proxy for technical salaries, compared to different countries. And Portugal has been, this is data from 2019, and I have not updated this, but it has consistently lower costs to do business here, on a place that, again, has already been mentioned, a place where software developers and people in general like to live in. And so very often we see the cases where even companies, born and headquartered in Berlin, but deciding to put their engineering teams in Portugal because it's high quality, lower cost, one low cost flight away from Berlin, and very good place to attract talent to. So this in general, so this combination of factors of successful companies on a relative basis, many successful companies with high talent and a low cost, has of course contributed a lot to higher numbers of capital investments into startup space in Portugal. So this is again a compilation. You see the growth and numbers here. Up until 2018, I'll talk about the more recent years later. But this has grown tremendously. Now, of course, what you also see here is the orange number, which is international investments, growing a lot here. This is also a very recent phenomenon. It was practically non-existent just a few years ago, until the international investors started to realize that, yeah, where did this OutSystems come from? And I never heard of it, and now it's such a brilliant company. And started looking and understanding what was going on here and starting deploying capital here. And nowadays we have, it's become almost commonplace. So to pick always on the same example of OutSystems, you have Goldman Sachs and KKR invested in them, but you also can mention, Axel investing in Dash. You can mention Salesforce investing in TalkDesk, Sapphire and Oak investing in Feedzai. So it's become commonplace and very natural that investors, and we sit with them in meetings every week, international investors coming to look at the Portuguese ecosystem and looking to deploy their money here. What you also, of course, notice in this chart is how small the local investment capacity has been and was in particular in those years of 2016 to 2018, which was a combination of most of the more active investors having exhausted their capacity around that time. It was certainly our case. It was the case also for other investors that, due to circumstances, one way or the other, did not have investment capacity, which of course also contributed to create space for international investors to come in, who bring in, of course, additional experience and deeper pockets, probably. Now, even that part, so the scarcity of local investment capacity, has been changing quite dramatically. So I did not have all the data to update the charts, but I'll just give you episodical evidence of what's been going on. So in the last couple of years, mostly all of the local investors have raised additional funds. So just until the mids of 2020, about more than 200 million had been raised by private venture capitals. Ourselves, so our recent fund was raised in 2019. Indico has a fund of similar size. Faber just announced a 30 million euro fund. Bind has an Iberian fund with 10 million. So there's quite a good collection of very experienced professional investors with very recently raised funds, so with substantial capital, which has been being deployed into Portuguese startups in 2019 and 20. So even changing that domestic capacity quite a lot. And we, the private investors, are not alone here, or the private venture funds are not alone here. So the private corporate world is also becoming a lot more active, which up to a certain point, probably 4 or 5 years ago, was not so much the case. Probably EDP was the more active corporate, so at least that's the local electric utility. But since then, Sonai IM, alongside with Byte Pixel, have developed a very, very active investment practice, particularly around cybersecurity and around retail tech. Semapanex, which is also a Portuguese industrial group, has become very, very active, supporting funds like ours, but also supporting the accelerator programs such as Techstars in Lisbon, and also doing direct investment. More recently, NOS, which is a telecommunications company here in Portugal, also launched a fund dedicated to 5G technologies. So even the corporate world has become a lot more active and making capital available to invest in startups. And finally, of course, and this has already been mentioned as well, an improved level of public support. And not only am I talking directly to companies, but also on my perspective as a fund, has become a lot more active. So for the first time, 2019, Portugal had a proper public fund of funds initiative. So a fund investing in venture capital funds to foster the industry, which is something that's been the practice in most of the European countries, but it had not been the practice here in Portugal. So that started being active and deployed 2019 with the management of the European Investment Fund, which is, as you might or may not know, is by far the largest investor in venture capital funds throughout Europe. So they've been in charge of managing the Portuguese fund of funds. Alongside also as another example, 200M, which was also already mentioned by João, I think, as a co-investment fund that is produces attractive co-investment terms for venture capital investors to deploy money into capital. So all in all, a very evolving landscape. And I think a combination of all these factors has really contributed to what we see today as a very professional and developed local ecosystem here. Promised only 5 slides, and this was it from me. I guess we'd move on to Q&A, Sebastian, right?
Thank you very much, Pedro. That was a very insightful presentation. I think you've shared in 5 slides a lot of very interesting information. Thank you very much. If you don't mind, we will open up for Q&A now. So I invite João and Pedro as well to join in. I don't know, Itziar, if we have any questions from Chile up until now.
No yet. We don't have any question in the chat. Yeah.
Well, I think that was very, very insightful and very clear. Perhaps I have a few points I've made throughout the 3 presentations. I don't think I mentioned it before, but next week during Web Summit, this will be our first official participation at the fair with a delegation. We're going to have 20 startup scale-ups taking place, unfortunately, not with a physical stand. It'll be all virtual this year for all. But I've been there together with the embassy in previous years, and it's an amazing event. We're trying to support higher visibility, not only, as Pedro mentioned, in the Portuguese market, but in general in Europe as a more broad market. We're going to have these 20 startups. We're also going to have a speaker on the main Congress. This is the founder of Notco, an artificial intelligence company that is producing plant-based food and is revolutionizing the food production chain. And we're also going to have a workshop showcasing the scaling from emerging markets, and we're going to be showcasing the case of Chile. So we're going to have 3 moments throughout the Web Summit. We think is a very important step this year for our ecosystem. I just wanted to know your view on what's the role, if you think Web Summit as an event, bringing the event to Lisbon, has played a major role or not so much in strengthening and accelerating the whole ecosystem. So please feel free to share your views on that.
So I'll go first, and mainly also because I have another call just right away, so I'll probably have to leave you guys soon or sooner. The Web Summit had an impact on the ecosystem. It's a bit like having a showcase. So throughout the last 4 years, we had more than 50,000 entrepreneurs coming to our country every year and feeling what it is to be in Portugal, at least for a week, and interacting with the people, taking a little taste of what it, and that has a country. Some of them decided after coming to the Web Summit to open a branch office over here or use it as a trampoline to Europe. So I couldn't say that it didn't have. However, it's not the reason why our ecosystem is growing and going faster. That has to do with things that were done in the recent years, but also in many, many years ago. So having the best qualified and highly trained generation of since ever, it was done 10 years ago. It's not something that was changed now. Having a VC ecosystem that is flourishing, that takes a decade. That takes a decade to build, because people have to learn how to do it. People have to fail and put themselves back on the right step. So it's not something that you just do immediately. Of course, when things are going well, if you don't do marketing over them, if you don't show to people what you are doing, things don't ramp up, don't accelerate. And the Web Summit, what it did for us was show to other people what we were doing internally. And that helps. That, of course, helps.
Absolutely. I don't know if you want to add to that, guys. Pedros?
Yeah, I'll go. It's just from the investor perspective, of course, you know, international investors and especially US investors that would not normally come for Portugal because they just didn't have a real reason to come. And Web Summit given them a reason. And while they're here, they'll use the opportunity and take the effort to take a few meetings, know the local ecosystem, and understand what really country is about. And we've had companies that have received investments from international investors because they met by accident at the Web Summit. That sort of serendipity or interest in a new geography, of course, the Web Summit has brought a lot of help.
Oh, absolutely, couldn't agree more. Is there any industry specific or sectors where you think Portugal is stronger? I know Pedro mentions a couple of conditions for investing in proprietary technology and differentiation factors, but is there any business model or technology or industry that you think is more prone to have an interest from the investor perspective, but in general as a country, considering the industrial scape?
Yeah, I can suggest. I mean, because precisely of the fact that we're in general talking with companies that have proprietary technologies, that typically means that they're B2B much more often than they're B2C companies. And within that space, because again of some scarcity of capital, of course, most of the times you're talking software companies in the B2B space. Now that's still a very, very broad thing to say, software B2B, but it already helps narrowing down. But then within that space, I mean, it starts tying to the companies that have become larger and have produced a lot of knowledge around themselves. In AI, of course, people that have worked with Fecha, for example, have, in some cases, spun off and created their own companies. In low code and in application development tools, so software development tools, we've seen many examples, and in some cases spinning out from OutSystems. Then there's, of course, the special case of Farfetch, which is sort of outside of everything that I've just described. So it's B2C and it's retail, it's in fashion, but it's a special case because they were incorporated in the UK and got funded by international investors from day zero, because there was just not enough deep pockets to do that here. But that, of course, has its own ramifications of creating its own little ecosystem around it, and interesting new startups coming from it.
For sure. Thanks, Pedro. I know João mentioned you need to leave for a call, so perhaps just gonna very quickly ask you if you can open up a little bit this fund of funds, the 200 million initiative you have, or you are presenting, looking at the scouting you're doing, or not you, but the fund is looking at, or the investors are looking at, perhaps in terms of geography or the conditions. Of course, you need to be set up in Portugal to be able to apply for those. But is there any, I don't know, if you have any numbers to share now in terms of what's the reality, percentage base, how many are from Portugal, from European origins or elsewhere, America, Africa, Latam, etc.? You're on mute, João. Can't hear you. Yep. Nope. No, you're still on mute.
No, mute.
No, yep.
No longer.
Cool.
Okay. So Pedro Santos might correct me and pull my ears if I don't say this well, but I will try to do my best. So one of the things that we try to do with 200M is that a lot of times the state doesn't understand or know what is a good investment, or for all stakes, what is a good startup. So when we thought about the co-investment funds, we decided that should be up to the investors who come to invest with us. And so the fund looks for high technology companies. The fund looks for deep technology and innovative things in general. It might be B2B, it might be B2C. It is a fact that companies have to have a foothold in Portugal. That can be managed in many different manners. However, who decides essentially what companies get funded? It's in the majority the investors. So companies, when they come to the 200M, they have been approved by another recognized investment fund who decided to put money. What the state does is support that investment and create an opportunity both for the investor and for the startup to grow faster. And that was what we had in mind when we proposed this initiative, which we feel that has been a very welcome initiative by the VCs and by the entrepreneurs in both ways. And we've seen an uptake. I think they're above 50% of execution right now, and with a pipeline to get it done in the next couple of months, I would say, most likely. We at the end of the road, we feel that this is a good way to approach the issue of how do the state invest in startups instead of trying to do it itself. Leave that to the experts.
Absolutely.
Pedro, your comments on my comment.
I think that's exactly right. So 200M, what it does essentially is creates incentives to deploy capital into companies by providing the co-investors, the private co-investors who have been vetted and on whom 200M places, the trust to have selected the right companies to invest in. It gives them the option to buy back the investment from 200M at a small interest rate a couple of years down the road. So that's economically and from a fund returns perspective an attractive proposition. And of course, so it has helped on several occasions. I think you're right about the deployment numbers. To increase the capital that the startups themselves have available to use.
Totally. Thank you very much. I think you mentioned before there is liquidity, there is appetite, there is a lot of attraction and visibility of the ecosystem. I think this is one of the key elements which is boosting the ecosystem in order to grow on a more rapid way. My last question before if you need to leave, João, but we typically highlight from other ecosystems we've been talking to the many initiatives they have been putting forward for open innovation programs, typically from corporate investment and money. But there is a culture in so many countries, of course in the US before everyone else, but in Europe, that's a very interesting one. So I don't know if you have any views on the open innovation challenges, João, and Pedro.
No, guys, I'm just waving because I have really
have to leave.
All
right.
Thank
you very much.
It was a pleasure. It was a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed it a lot. I hope we can do it in another time with a little bit more time. Very sorry to have to leave.
We will. Thank you so
much
for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So, Pedro, Henriques, maybe you wanna take that. What's your view on if there is enough, or do you think that's a trend growing on in Portugal? Just to get that more information about the corporate sector with the open innovation initiatives.
Yeah, I would say definitely that open innovation is something that we also see growing. More and more companies, the more traditional corporate world is now, I feel, doing two things. One is obviously starting those investment funds, right, from the corporate side, and taking part of their profits and reinvest. Actually, there's also some interesting tax credits and benefits that they can, take advantage of to create that investment. And that's just kind of a snowball that keeps growing, right, in terms of investment into the ecosystem. And another thing is also then to look at those startups from almost externalize their R&D department, right? So that's how a lot of companies do. Instead of having that internally, you just make sure that you can invest on the companies, right? And you would focus on probably your vertical, as Pedro was saying, with the retail tech for Sonai. And so any good ideas, they will have like a lot of way to grow with their sponsors, with their investors, right? Because they are on the same space. So that's the trend. I think that it is really nothing new. It's just a lot of the things that already happen elsewhere. But I feel that in the last, I don't know, probably 4 years or so, we started to see it as well in here. There is, if you enable me so, one of the areas that I feel we have not done that, and probably because we don't have a lot of industry to support us, more on the biotech field, which me personally, I think is a huge, huge, huge opportunity. There's tremendous amount of quality in terms of professionals right there, as in software, as Pedro said, but there's not a lot of big startups or even a lot of corporate supporting that. So that feels like one of the areas that we've been missing a bit, but anything that goes retail tech, insurtech, fintech does have a lot of leeway with corporates and this overall ecosystem of open innovation.
Great, Pedro. I think those are really good insights. We're near the end, so if you want to wrap it up with some recommendations for startups, scale-ups, or even venture capital investors from Chile looking at European markets, please feel free to I don't know, Pedro Ribeiro, if you want to start first, or whichever.
Well, I guess I can start. Yeah, so like I said, I do think Portugal is a great country, even if you have the goal of expanding further into the European Union. We see cases like, for instance, international companies. One of the cases was Uber. They had, for instance, their sales team based out of Portugal, supporting launch in different countries from Portugal. It is, again, boils down to the language skills, so that's interesting. Also, that from a technology standpoint, Portugal, the population itself is an early adopter. I recall when you look at smartphone adoption, when you look at broadband internet adoption, all of those Portuguese people are usually more keen to adopt technology than some other places in Europe. So that's yet another reason why we truly believe that Portugal is a great way to launch, right? And then it could, what you shouldn't do is, well, two things. One, focus from a business development perspective just on Portugal domestic market, right? So Pedro said that, and 100%, not even the Portuguese startups focus just on the Portuguese domestic market, right? It is what it is, but it's a good base for Europe. And second, is when you consider all of that, do your due diligence, right? Prepare yourself, have a good plan to get into a country. Don't just jump. I've seen many companies taking too long. And obviously we know in startups time is money indeed, right? So you don't want to be making those mistakes. So get partners, talk with people, network. It might not be a company like ours, could be just networking. Talk with Pedro, talk with João, understand the ecosystem, talk with other founders. That's very important.
Yeah, I mean, just my closing remarks. I mean, you while you're doing this series of events, you're probably getting pitched by all the countries throughout Europe, each one with its strengths. We're certainly not one of the richest countries, one of the largest, but there certainly we certainly have lots going for us. A country that has been developing quite a lot in all the dimensions of entrepreneurship and startups. And so again, invite you, like Pedro was just saying, invite you just to talk to people around here. I'm available. I know absolutely nothing about the Chilean venture capital ecosystem. If there's any investors in the call, I'd love to get in touch and understand and compare notes. You're very welcome. And I'd just like to commend you, Sebastian, for doing these days a conference or a call, or however we want to call this, that is not about COVID, is very refreshing, because that's all we've been talking about at every conference.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Pedro. I think we've gotten a lot of information throughout the call. It's been a very, it feels very natural, very close. So I appreciate you, the three. We'll also extend the greetings later for João. There were a lot of interesting data in your presentation, Pedro. I think it highlights a lot of opportunities, and you also, Pedro, mentioned about sectors and industries, technologies. We learned a lot about the mindset from the investor's perspective, and some of the key opportunities that might lie ahead establishing a business in Portugal. So I really want to thank you, and I would like to give the microphone to Jimena from our embassy, the Embassy of Chile in Portugal, which would like to give us a closure as well. Jimena, are you there?
Yes. Hi. Can you listen to
Hi,
me?
Jimena. Yes, perfect.
Okay. Well, hello, hola a todos. I am Jimena Callaga from the Embassy of Chile. I just want to say thank you to João, to Pedro, Ribeiro, and Pedro Henriques for your interesting presentations. I can testify that Portugal is a very nice place to live, and Chile and Portugal is right that we have a lot of things in common. And finally, I just want to say thank you to Pedro Sacramento from Startup Portugal for their support, for their help, and to Angélica Cáceres from our embassy, and to Sebastian and Ilse for all your support for making this webinar possible. So I invite you to my friends in Chile to come, and you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Jimena. You've been of great support throughout the year and before, with, as I mentioned before, with Web Summit. Also wanted to thank Pedro Sacramento for his support introducing us all. And we invite all our Chilean startups and entrepreneurs connected today to complete a small survey. It's already shared on the chat box. And if we might have your presentations, Pedro and João, it'll be very helpful for all to go through again if they have any doubts, and to get in touch with you directly. Again, thank you very much. I hope to see you digitally next week on Web Summit, and we'll stay in touch. Definitely, we need to do a follow-up session later, probably with more specifics about the ecosystem in Chile as well. We'll be very happy to do so. Thank you very much, everybody, for connecting, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Take care,
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.